So which factions are stomping the tabletops flat these days, and which ones need a little bit of help? Let's see which ones are winning in real games at the moment. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking about the best and worst armies of 40k currently. I did a video like this about half a year ago, where we basically look at quite a lot of tournament results and do a bit of a rough and ready check of the meta, to see which armies are sweeping events left, right and centre, and which have very few winnings altogether. In the video we're going to touch on each and every army, starting with the weaker armies and moving forward to the best, and focusing on exactly why the best armies are doing so well right now. For this rough check of which armies are winning events recently, I basically harvested the results from the Best Coast Pairings app, the one for organising tournaments for the last 2 months, and included every 2,000 point event with at least 10 participants and had at least 3 rounds in it. I then took the top 10% of all the army lists, which amounted to a massive 217 lists, scored 1 point for each faction that's in that bracket, and if there was an allied army, I scored the one that had the most points spent on it. I thought that this would give us a fairly decent check as to which armies are generally doing well over the past couple of months, though I do accept there's a few factors that would skew the results. If one army's played quite a lot more, they're going to get more results just by people playing it, including some smaller events like these RTTs can be a bit more random, maybe not quite as powerfully selective as the really big events, but there aren't all that many of them going on at the moment anyway. And also just for Drukhari and Dark Angels, their codexes actually came out in this period, so they both didn't have all that many results beforehand, and then went to suddenly having a lot, so their numbers are likely to be a little bit understated if anything. In any case though, let's go through the list, see which armies are winning the fewest events, and move forward to those that are winning the most. So first up we come to the 3 armies that had literally 0 placings in the top 10% of any of the events that I could find. Genestealer Cult have been quite obviously one of the weaker factions of 9th edition since the start. Their units are just quite expensive for what they do, and they lack raw hitting power and durability. Their cult ambush tricks just don't seem to be enough right now. They have done well at some events in the past, but it seems that not many people are playing them at the moment. The Imperial Fists and Crimson Fists don't have any placings either. Again, I'm not massively surprised by this one. They've got a solid chapter tactic, but in their codex supplement they don't have all that much more that's going for them. I would perhaps argue that they're one of the weaker Space Marine chapters right now. Finally, we have the Death Watch, which I was a little bit surprised not to see any placings at all. I'd certainly say they're not one of the stronger Space Marine chapters, but they do have their own quite nice tricks, including psychic powers for Feel No Pain, their nice Beacon, Angelus and Invulsave relics, and all their interesting kill team synergy. I think both for Imperial Fist and Death Watch it might be more of a case of them being overshadowed by other chapters. They just don't seem to be the Space Marines of choice right now. Moving on, we come to all the armies that only have 1 or 2 placings on the top 10% of tournament results. Inari just got the 1 result. There isn't all that much reason to play them over Craft Worlds or Drukhari aside from just allying characters in, which a few lists did seem to do. Imperial Knights only had the 1 result as well. Being all vehicles, they'll struggle with 9th edition missions and are punished by the secondaries quite badly. It seems their raw power just isn't strong enough to make up for that at the moment. Next we have Tau Empire, again one of the weaker factions of 9th. Their playstyle means that they just don't want to be taking the centre of the board too much, and that doesn't really gel very well with the 9th missions, plus their big increase in the price of their tactical drones really does ruin one of their biggest and most powerful synergies. I think they really need a codex to help them out. Chaos Knights are a very similar story to Imperial Knights, though there were a fair few more small detachments of them allied to greater Chaos lists, particularly things like War Dogs popping up, who can be really quite dangerous for the points between some rerolls from their household traits and also their Iconoclast melee buff. Still though, mainly Chaos Knight lists do seem to be struggling, probably for similar reasons to the Imperial ones. Next we have Black Templars, who got 2 placings, still one of the less popular Space Marines at the moment. Their chapter tactic isn't the most overwhelming in the world, though like Deathwatch I feel they have quite a lot of interesting tricks. Things like their unique litanies, the Crusader Helm, certain Warlord traits, and Devout Push. I would just say as well, it really does depend on how you count up the Space Marine army lists, whether you count them all into one big mass, or if you count them individually like here in their individual supplement books. Games Workshop really has blurred the line as to what really denotes a faction in 40k. Talking of Marines, we next come to Raven Guard. They have 2 placings, again not a ton to sell them to competitive players. Maybe things like deep striking Centurions, Shrike himself, and being able to pull off really quite a powerful Alpha Strike are some of the main draws. And lastly for this level we have Grey Knights. Since 9th started they've been struggling with their Smite nerf, not being able to cast it as much. and they no longer have the biggest, baddest Death Stars around in those paladins. Certain other chapters and Chaos Legions might be stealing their glory there. Stepping up a notch, we come to the armies that have 3 to 5 placings on the list. First we have Thousand Sons with 3 placings, all of which included Magnus and were generally allied to other powerful Chaos armies such as Demons or Death Guard. In general, Thousand Sons just don't seem strong enough to be able to carry the core of an army. They're more included in small numbers to harness their most powerful tricks and maybe add Magnus to a bit of a monster mash Chaos list. Next we have Iron Hands, who also had 3. They're fairly well rounded for Space Marines, decent durability, and if you want to run vehicles then they might be one of the best options. Salamanders were honestly a bit of a surprise to me that they didn't place higher. They only have 3 placings in the last couple of months. This is down enormously from early 9th, when they were consistently one of the top placing armies at multiple tournaments. Perhaps the Dark Angels have stolen their thunder a bit in recent months, but I also think that the new Codex Space Marines contributed to toning them down a bit. I still say they're solid enough though, decent damage from Melters and Flamers, and really quite nice stratagems. Next we have the Chaos Space Marines with 4 placings. Their armies tend to revolve around some fairly big synergy units, things like Obliterators, Noise Marines or Possessed Squads, all buffed up to the 9s between character buffs, stratagems and psychic powers to make some really decent damage output, and the recent points changes have given units like Terminator Squads with Lightning Claws and Combi Bolters a real new lease of life. Again, like other Chaos lists, they seem to be allied more often than not. Next we come to the Tyranids, who I feel are doing a fairly solid mid-tier. They were definitely helped out quite a bit in the points changes in January. Hive Guards and Exocrines remain very efficient, swarms of little bugs can help steal objectives, and Forge World Compendium has given them the powerful tools of Dimecherons and Hierodules, both of which are now very efficient for the points and very good target for melee monster buffs. Next up we come to Craft Worlds, also with 5 placings, an army that are doing a bit better than they were in the previous list that I did. They certainly have their own decent tricks, really good psychic synergy with Doom, Jinx and Mortal Wound outputs, really quite powerful chapter tactics with their expert crafters and masterful shots and things, and they do seem to make good use of quite a lot of Forge World options in the more recent lists. Most of the time they do seem to be run as allies at the moment, usually alongside Harlequins to give a different dimension to that army, as of course Harlequins have so few options. Ultramarines also take 5 placings. They might possibly be a bit over-exaggerated within the Space Marine list, as they're comparatively highly played compared with other chapters. Still though, they do have their own good tricks. That Seal of Oath relic is great. There's really nice flexibility with the amount of movement and redeployment tricks they can do, and they've got access to a really good roster of buffing characters such as Chief Librarian Tigurius, Calgar, or even Gilliman himself. Before we move on, I realised I did manage to leave out White Scars on the list. They got 4 placings, and again I feel they might be slightly stronger than these numbers say. They're a really solid melee army, can make it across the table in lightning speed, and their unique assault doctrine combined with Vanguard veterans with lightning claws is really quite potent to behold. I feel like they might be a fairly similar strength to Space Wolves and Blood Angels, though maybe just not played quite as prevalently. Next up we get into the mid-tier of the armies now. All of these have between 6 and 10 placings in the top 10%. First up we're leading with Astra Militarum, and despite not having a new codex, they have got a fair few boosts since early in 8th. In particular, Death Corps Krieg Death Riders do seem to be making quite a bit of appearances, seeing as they're just ridiculously tanky for the points at the moment, and the already good Borgrin and Chimeras got even cheaper. Combine that with some good Ignores line of sight firepower in Manticores, and excellent anti-tank in Demolisher tanks, and it does seem that they're perhaps no longer one of the weakest armies in 9th. Next up we have the Space Wolves and the Blood Angels. Basically these seem to be the go-to for fighty close combat Space Marines right now. Space Wolves have a lot of melee tricks and are just really quite well rounded. They're Wolf Guard with jump packs and Wolf Guard Terminators, both are really strong melee troops, and they've got some good stratagems to support them in close combat, such as that one that gets them +1 to wound. Blood Angels I'd say are mainly carried by their incredibly strong chapter tactic. +1 to the charge and +1 to wounds is never going to go wrong, but particularly having access to the really undercosted Sanguinary Guard are one of the best shock assault troops in the Imperium. Next up we have a bit of a rising star with Drukhari, who got 8 placings, and I think it was particularly telling that almost all of their placings were since they got their powerful new codex. That's only been playable for a couple of weekends, so it really is saying something that they've got all of these top results in such a short period of time. At the moment I don't think it's clear whether or not they'll actually make it to the top spots, but they'll certainly be getting there if they keep up this momentum. Overall, I really quite like the Drukhari decks. They have some incredibly strong Witch Cult units these days, really nice fast transports for snagging objectives, and excessively fighty, incredibly cheap characters in Succubi and Archons. Next up we come to the Harlequins, which seem to have slipped a bit since the pre-codex days in 8th edition, where on my last list they were the top faction. They're still certainly doing very well, with 10 placings here, which I think certainly looks solid for them, as they're one of the less played armies in 40k as it goes. They don't have too many options in their roster. Starweavers full of fusion pistol Harlequin troops, fast and hard-hitting Skyweaver jet bikes, and some really nice character support. They often seem to be fielded with a little bit of support from Craftworld's Oyonari. Next we come to the Chaos Demons, who both seem to have some success as a pure faction, but also allied to the various other facets of Chaos that we've already talked about. Perhaps some of the most common models to see in their detachments are the Exalted Keepers of Secrets, lightning fast and very hard hitting, the Exalted Lord of Change who flies around smashing things with magic and being almost unkillable, and some really nice objective claiming units including Nurglings, Beasts of Nurgle, and some Fiends of Slaanesh to lock you in combat. Despite having a codex with a fair few underwhelming units in, Chaos Demons definitely still seem to be doing work. It'll be interesting to see if the new Be'lakor makes a splash in Chaos lists when he comes out. Next we have the Sisters of Battle, also on 10 placings, and again they were a faction that I was a little bit surprised not to see with a few more. They can be enormously hard hitting, both with Repentia in melee and Retributors with their multi-melter shooting, backed up with some powerful miracle dice that can really either hammer charges home or get some maximum damage shots on those melters. Combined with a fairly durable battle line for scoring objectives, they're generally a solid threat in 9th. They do have a codex due out soon, so it'll be interesting to see how things change for them. So we're moving into the top 6 factions now, and just nosing out the Sisters and Demons, we have the Adeptus Mechanicus, who got 11 top 10% wins on the list of tournaments. They do seem to have been consistently about this sort of level all throughout 9th edition. Whichever flavour you bring them in, they're likely to have really devastating firepower. Cataphrons, Castellans, Onagers, Iron Striders, and Scorpius tanks all put out really good amounts of firepower, and they can have some really good synergy with the various auras that they have from the Engine War supplement. On top of that, they've got some really decent melee units with Fulgurite Priests and Scorpius Dune Riders, and Archaeopter Fusiliers around that can really annoy and harass the enemy. It's going to be really interesting to see just how strong they are when their new codex drops. It looks like a lot of their stats are going to be buffed, but it remains to be seen whether or not the points cost or loss of synergies might outweigh that. Next up we come to the Orcs, who have had no less than 15 placings on the list. Honestly, I wasn't expecting Orcs to be quite this high, but it does seem that for whatever reason they are achieving a fair amount of results. The majority of the Orc lists seem to be death skulls these days. They have some really nice rerolls for damage buffs on certain buggies and vehicles, plus they get Obsec on all of their infantry units, which means that small units of things like commandos can be useful for flipping over objectives. There's a couple of hordes of Goths in there as well, Ghazghkull leading an enormous amount of boys into the fray, and they often tend to be supported by very nice mech guns who provide some dirt cheap firepower and don't roll to wound against the toughness characteristic, meaning that they're quite potent against chewing through Space Marines and Dark Angels Terminators in particular. In joint third place on the list, we have the durable and deathless forces of the Necrons. They're excessively hard to kill, with enormous blobs of warriors and scarab swarms being the norm, often protected by things like chronomancers for invul saves. They can also bring some really hard units to deal with, things like the Catan Shard of the Nightbringer, who is the answer to pretty much any single character in the enemy's army, or the Silent King to make melee units fight last against him. Beyond that, just quite a lot of the Necron roster is quite well balanced, meaning they've got solid tools to fill most battlefield roles, and all of this does seem to have them performing very solidly right now. I would say that there are probably quite a lot of people playing Necrons at the moment. They are one of the main 2 starter armies for 9th, and they have got a whole load of really nice looking new models to attract people to the faction, so I think it's not too surprising that a lot of people are playing them and a lot of people are getting results. Next, also on joint third, we have the Adeptus Custodes. They also got 18 placings in the last couple of months, and again they've been consistently one of the higher placing factions in 9th edition since it started. Their slow moving durable infantry with Obsec on every single unit in the army is really solid. They have characters that can both deal excessive amounts of damage, be very tanky and also Obsec objectives, and they've got a wide variety of various different Forge World units for additional support to help fill the other battlefield roles. Some of the ranged custodian variants, things like the Sagittarium, are really powerful, and it also means they have some fast moving, high power fire support, things like the gunships, dreadnoughts and grav tanks. So moving on to second place on the list, and we have none other than the Dark Angels. They have no less than 25 placings, And on top of this, their codex actually dropped within the last 2 months, so they had a fair few weeks where they didn't even have their new codex. This means that in all likelihood, they might be getting even more than this in the future. Perhaps their most powerful tricks at the moment are both the Deathwing and the Ravenwing. Their Terminators can only be wounded on a 4+, they can get -1 damage on a unit with a Relic Banner, their Terminators can all be OBSEC, and they can have great psychic support for taking away opponents' objective secured or auras, or giving them all mad rerolls. They combine really well with an Apothecary as well, allowing you to set up another Terminator every turn, to only add to the durable advancing wall of death. Around a Terminator battle line, Ravenwing units are pretty much ideal support. Again, they're tougher than most other Space Marine bike units, as provided they move, they get the 5+ invul save, which can even get even better if they advance. One of their units can get a pre-game move. They have some other really good supporting strategies for bikers. They get objective secured on their fast-moving bike squads, and overall they're one of the best places to run attack bikes, which I'd say are one of the strongest units in the Space Marine Codex for Melter-related fire support. That's far from everything though. They have a really brutal stratagem that prevents a lot of Horde units from being able to attack their units when they get in combat. As for 1 CP, only models that are actually within engagement range can fight, and that really hurts any big unit trying to kill them in combat. They've got a really easy to score secondary objective, where they just need to defend their home objective all game long, and that means that they get the full points. Their gunline units will be solid fire support if they don't move, getting +1 to hit, and a big plasma unit can take advantage of weapons from the Dark Age and make them enormously hard-hitting against near enough any target. Between all of these crazy advantages, I just think that they're not really very well balanced compared with the other Space Marine chapters right now, and I think if you're running Space Marines competitively, Dark Angels do seem to be the way to go. I think that if they were brought back into line a bit, we'd see a lot more play of armies like Salamanders and Ultramarines again. In any case, Dark Angels do seem to be one of the armies to beat at the moment. And that brings us to arguably one of the strongest factions in 40k at the moment then, the Death Guard, who got a crazy 37 placings on the list, at around 1 in every 6 armies in the top 10% being Death Guard. I think most of us know what Death Guard can do in game right now over the last few months. Their Terminators are a massive pain to remove between good toughness, invuls and -1 damage. Mortarion himself is a really common include in Death Guard lists. If you shoot him down, you're likely spending most of your army's firepower to do so, and neglecting the rest of the army. And if you don't, he's just going to fly around and delete 1 unit per turn with his scythe. Poxwalkers are one of the best cheap screening units in the game, being really tough for 5 points, and they can weirdly turn into a powerful damage dealing unit with a chance to deal a whole bunch of mortal wounds. They seem very good with that new formation that allows them to deep strike as well. They've got plenty of other things though, really powerful demon engines such as bloat drones with flesh mowers, or good fire support with the indomitable plague burst crawlers, plenty of mortal wounds tricks between psychic powers and stratagems, contagions of Nurgle to reduce your toughness when you get close, and some really nice support characters in the feated Vivion. At the moment it would seem that Death Guard have been top dog over the last couple of months. Perhaps if we allow for the fact that the Dark Angels Codex came out halfway through it, then I'd say they're more or less even as the armies to beat right now. So overall, the list of top factions will be Death Guard with 37 placings, then Dark Angels, Necrons, Custodies and Orcs, and not too far behind them are Admech, Sisters, Demons and Harlequins, all on roughly the same level. I think that these would give you a fair estimation of the armies that you're likely to run into when you're playing in tournaments, and the ones that you have to try and work out ways to beat. Finally, just to leave with a few further thoughts, I would like to stress that this is only just one way to measure army strength against each other. You can also track things like win rates as well, where the 40k stats tend to do this, when it seems that some of their top dogs are Drakari, Orcs, Custodies, Sisters and Dark Angels. There are some other ones up there, but they do seem to be more like outliers, only scoring so high because only a couple of talented people are playing their faction as a main. Perhaps most notably, Death Guard and Necrons are considerably lower on the list compared with my list, which I think might be due to the fact that they're played quite so regularly, both of them being the main antagonist starter sets for 8th edition and 9th edition respectively. I feel like as well as having very good players doing well with these lists, you're likely to get a lot more people who are players at a far more casual level, maybe dragging down their scores a little bit in events. Even if they don't have quite as high a win rate, I think that you're still going to have to go through these armies quite a lot if you want to win tournaments. They're certainly strong in the hands of the right general. Finally, I just wanted to mention the different ways that you could look at Space Marines in the list. Before we had all the different supplement books for Codex Space Marines, things like Ultramarines and White Scars, I would have wanted to group them all together. If we ignored the ones that had their own codex in 8th edition, they'd have 17 placings, with armies such as Ultramarines, White Scars and Imperial Fists. If you combine them all, so they'd be doing pretty similarly to armies like Orcs, Necrons, or Custodes. Honestly, I think that this might be a bit more of an intelligent way to look at the army. It's certainly hard to argue that Space Marines as a faction are weak right now. Now, armies like Blood Angels, Space Wolves, and Dark Angels are at least theoretically equal to all the other Space Marine supplements. If we grouped every single one together, they'd have 55 results out of the 217 ones on the list. I guess that could theoretically put them top if you went down that way, but I do feel like armies like Blood Angels, Space Wolves, and Dark Angels are significantly different to standard Space Marines. It sort of has some parallels with lumping armies like Death Guard, Thousand Sons, and Chaos Marines all into one Chaos Astartes faction. Games Workshop definitely have blurred the lines a little bit as to how you rank Space Marines. So anyway, hope you've enjoyed a quick breakdown of the armies that seem to be doing the best in 40k right now. As always, I'll certainly look forward to hearing your thoughts and ideas down in the comments. Are the results what you were expecting? And do you think that any armies have the potential to be stronger than this in the future? If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly keep the 40k videos coming pretty much every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying the videos recently and you'd like to help support the channel, I do have a Patreon page which is down in the video description. Making all this content every day does take quite a lot of work, particularly massive comparison ones like this, where I need to spend several hours just counting up tournament results, never mind actually making the video. If you'd like to help content like this keep on coming, then any support is massively appreciated. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, such as seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next for the channel, and automatic entry into the regular channel prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support the channel, then the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.